Mindset Tales presents Shyla Vandran, the witch detective who hunted reality itself. The rain did not descend in any honest fashion that night. It did not strike pavement, nor drum upon corrugated roofs, nor gather itself into rivulets that obeyed gravity's tired commandments. It seeped. It oozed from the firmament in a manner both reluctant and inevitable, as though the sky, some vast, unseen organ stretched too thin above the city, had succumbed to a slow and patient rot. What fell was less water than the suggestion of decay, a thin exudation that clung to skin and fabric with an intimacy I found deeply offensive. It carried a scent not of storm, but of something long interred and recently disturbed: wet stone, old wood, and the faint, unmistakable sweetness of dissolution. By the time I realized I had been standing still too long beneath it, the damp had already worked its way through my coat, through the seams, through the quiet defenses one learns not to think about. I drew on my cigarette more out of habit than desire. The smoke tasted wrong, earthy in a way tobacco should not be, as though the leaves had been cured in a grave rather than a barn. Each inhale left behind a residue that seemed to settle behind the eyes. It was in the midst of that small, bitter ritual that the corpse chose to speak.
"Find her. Please find her."
The words did not emerge so much as occur, forced into existence from a mouth that had no business forming them. The lips themselves did not move in any meaningful way. They quivered, perhaps, or shifted slightly as the surrounding tissue resisted the indignity. It was a whisper only in the sense that it was quiet. In every other regard, it possessed the texture of something pushed through too narrow a space. I did not startle. That reflex had been worn down to nothing long ago, eroded by repetition and necessity alike. The dead, for all their transgressions, are at least honest in their condition. It is the living who cultivate unease, who walk about with their eyes open and their senses shuttered, steadfastly ignoring the subtle abrasions in reality, the faint but persistent scratching that emanates from beneath the surface of things. I turned instead, slow and deliberate, and lowered myself into a crouch beside the body. The alley was narrow, hemmed in by walls that sweated with age and neglect. My boots sank slightly as I shifted my weight, the ground neither solid nor liquid, but an unpleasant compromise between the two. The water pooled there behaved incorrectly. It accepted the rain, yes, but did not respond to light. The jaundiced glow of the street lamp above failed to take hold upon its surface. When I glanced down, there was no reflection waiting for me, no warped echo of my own face, no fractured image of the world above. Only a depthless, lightless plain, as though the concept of reflection had been quietly rescinded. I noted this without surprise. Absences are rarely accidental. My voice sounded overly present in the muffled air.
"Who do you want me to find?"
The corpse lay on its back, eyes half-lidded in a posture that suggested interruption rather than rest. For a moment, nothing happened. Then its jaw shifted. The movement was wrong in a way that defied simple description. It did not hinge so much as hesitate, as though the act of opening required negotiation with something internal, something that objected to the continuation of speech. A faint, fibrous sound accompanied it, like old paper being bent against its grain.
"The one who unmade me."
The final word lingered, not in the air, but in the mind, as though it had been impressed rather than heard. I exhaled slowly, watching the smoke disperse into patterns that felt almost deliberate. A simple request. They always believed it would be simple, as though naming the act, murder, disappearance, desecration, contained within it the means of resolution. As though the world still adhered to causes and effects that could be traced in straight lines. I reached out, extending 2 fingers toward the corpse's temple. The skin was cold, but not with the clean absence of life. It possessed a residual warmth, a memory of function that had not yet fully relinquished its hold. I pressed lightly, feeling for the subtle tension that marks the boundary between what is and what was. Then I whispered. The name I used was not one that belonged to any language meant for breath. It coiled as it emerged, folding in on itself, a compact invocation that sought not permission but access. The effect was immediate. The world did not shift so much as fail to maintain cohesion. The alley peeled back, not like a curtain, but like skin separated from flesh. For a vertiginous instant, I perceived both layers at once, the familiar geometry of brick and refuse, and beneath it, or perhaps within it, something immeasurably larger. The alley was not an alley. It was a wound, a narrow incision carved into a vast and undulating expanse that possessed neither horizon nor boundary. It pulsed with a slow, deliberate rhythm, as though it were part of some colossal organism whose totality could not be apprehended. The walls were no longer walls, but edges, ragged, imperfect, and faintly aware. And the rain, oh God, the rain. What I had taken for water revealed itself as a procession of minuscule, translucent entities, descending in endless number. Each drop writhed with subtle motion, its form uncertain, as though it had not yet committed to a stable existence. They did not fall so much as crawl downward, guided by impulses I cannot name. Where they touched surfaces, they did not splash, they adhered, merging briefly before separating again, leaving behind a faint, glistening residue that quivered as if alive. And the corpse. I focused, forcing my perception to settle upon it. It was incomplete. Not damaged, not in the conventional sense. There were no wounds to catalog, no trauma to trace. Instead, there were gaps. Small, precise absences where something, some essential aspect, had been removed with surgical indifference. The body existed, yes, but not fully. It was as though a series of crucial details had been omitted from its design, leaving behind a structure that resembled a human being, without entirely qualifying as one. A dreadful clarity took hold. This was not death. Death, at least, is an ending that acknowledges what came before. This was revision. The corpse had not been killed. It had been edited, as if deleted from the pages of a book. The realization struck with such force that I recoiled physically, my hand tearing away as though burned. The name I had spoken unraveled on my tongue, its structure collapsing as I withdrew the permission it had momentarily granted me. Reality reasserted itself with brutal efficiency. The wound became an alley once more. The vastness receded beyond perception. The rain resumed its masquerade as water, though I could no longer fully believe in it. I found myself gasping, lungs straining against air that felt suddenly too thin, too simplified. For a moment, I did nothing but breathe. The cigarette had burned down unnoticed, its ember now dangerously close to my fingers. I crushed it against the damp brick wall beside me. The contact produced a soft hiss, and something else. A smear remained where I had pressed it, darker than it should have been, glistening faintly. It pulsed.
Once, twice.
Then stilled, settling into inert discoloration as though embarrassed to have been observed. Edited? The word seemed heavy, reluctant. It did not belong to any case I had ever taken.
Well now, that's new.
They call me Shyla Vandran. The name is not the one I was born with, if, indeed, I was ever afforded something so stable as a beginning, but it is the one that has endured. Names, like all things, erode under pressure. They are worn down by use, misused by enemies, forgotten by friends, and occasionally taken apart by forces that find identity and inconvenience. This one has survived longer than most. It will do. In another age, one less subtle in its cruelties, less concerned with maintaining the illusion of reason, I would have been dealt with in a manner befitting the anxieties of the time. Dragged into a public square, thick with the smell of pitch and righteousness perhaps, and fastened to a post while a crowd convinced itself it was witnessing justice, rather than fear made manifest. Or bound in coarse rope and consigned to black water, the surface closing overhead as though eager to forget me. There are other possibilities, too. Stranger ones, quieter ones. There have always been those who recognize utility where others see only threat. I might have been taken in, elevated, adorned with titles that meant nothing and expectations that meant less. Burned, drowned, or crowned, the outcomes differ, but the root remains the same. A need to control what cannot be understood. This age is more discreet. It has traded spectacle for denial, ritual for paperwork. People no longer gather to watch a witch die. They merely pretend she does not exist, right up until they find themselves with a problem that refuses to obey the laws they trust. Then they come knocking, not at doors that are listed or lit, but at the edges of their own certainty, following rumors they would deny in daylight. My clients tend to fall into two categories. The first are the desperate, the families who have exhausted every acceptable avenue and found nothing at the end of it but silence. Missing persons who do not stay missing in any conventional sense. Deaths that leave behind no cause, only absence. They come to me hollowed out by grief, clutching photographs and fragments of memory, willing to overlook whatever unease I inspire, so long as I can offer them something in return, an answer, a body, an end. The second are the professionals who have learned, through bitter experience, that the world occasionally refuses to cooperate.
Detectives mostly.
Underfunded, overworked, and far too perceptive for their own comfort. They do not believe in magic, not in any way they would admit, but they believe in patterns, in anomalies, in the quiet accumulation of details that do not fit. Eventually, those details point in my direction. When they come to me, they do so with a careful neutrality, asking questions that are deliberately imprecise, offering information in exchange for results. They have learned not to inquire too deeply into my methods. It is not trust that keeps them from asking. It is self-preservation. Magic, they say, when they speak of what I do, if they speak of it at all. The word is offered as both explanation and dismissal, a convenient container into which the inexplicable may be placed and safely ignored, as though naming a thing renders it understood. But magic is not power. Power suggests ownership, control, an inherent quality that can be wielded without consequence. That is a comforting lie. Magic is permission. It is the act of requesting access to processes that predate intention, to mechanisms that were not designed with human comprehension in mind. It is a negotiation conducted in a language that does not forgive vagueness, with entities that do not recognize the validity of refusal in the way we do. When I work, I do not command. I ask. I offer. I align myself, briefly and carefully, with forces that have no reason to grant me anything at all. And sometimes they do. Every such allowance leaves a mark. I think of them as threads, not because they are delicate, but because they connect. Each favor granted, each boundary bent, each glimpse afforded beyond the permitted. These things do not exist in isolation. They attach themselves to me, subtle and persistent, trailing off into distances I cannot fully perceive. Some are taut, humming faintly with tension, as though something at the other end is aware of me in return. Others lie slack, dormant, waiting for a moment when they might be drawn tight. I do not always know what lies at the far end of these threads. That is perhaps the most dangerous part, because every thread leads somewhere. One day, whether by design, by accident, or by some slow and patient convergence I cannot yet perceive, those threads will draw taut. not all at once. Nothing so merciful. It will begin subtly, I suspect. A shift in the tension. A tremor along one of the countless invisible lines I have allowed to be fastened to me. A hesitation in the air, as though something has paused to consider the path laid out before it. And then recognition, not mine, theirs. Because threads are not one-sided things. They are connections, and connection implies awareness, however distant, however alien. I have spent years tracing them outward, following their delicate, terrible geometry into places that resist description. I have grown accustomed to the idea that I am the observer, that I am the one who seeks, who listens, who intrudes. But that is a comforting assumption and a false one. There will come a moment when something, somewhere along that vast and tangled network, will incline itself in my direction. Not out of malice, necessarily. Not even out of curiosity, in any way I would understand the word. It will simply notice, the way one might notice a loose thread on a garment, or a faint sound in an otherwise silent room. And having noticed, it will follow. Not quickly, not with urgency. Such things have no need for haste. It will move along the path I have helped to define, drawing closer with each imperceptible shift, each quiet allowance I have ever made. To it, distance will be a negotiable inconvenience, time, an irrelevant constraint. And when it arrives, when whatever resides at the far end of those countless permissions finally reaches the point where I stand, I do not believe there will be anything I can do to stop it. That is the nature of threads. They remember the way back. The victim's name was Elias Rook. It sat on the page with a kind of stubborn mediocrity, the letters arranged in a sequence so utterly devoid of distinction that the mind resisted holding onto it for longer than necessary. I had seen names like it countless times, names that neither invited curiosity nor repelled it, that passed through conversation and documentation alike without leaving so much as an impression. A name designed, it seemed, to be overlooked. Elias Rook, accountant. The word carried with it an entire life in miniature, columns of numbers, quiet offices lit by artificial light, the soft, repetitive percussion of keys struck without passion. A profession built upon order, upon the careful balancing of figures, upon ensuring that everything added up to something comprehensible. It was the sort of existence that generated no stories, no disruptions, only records. He was, by every available measure, unremarkable. The kind of man who could occupy the same seat in the same room for years and leave behind nothing but a faint indentation in the furniture and a handful of files no one would ever revisit. The kind of man whose absence would register first as a delay, then as a mild inconvenience, and only much later, as an afterthought, as a loss. Even before his death, if what had happened to him could be so cleanly defined, he would have been difficult to recall with any clarity. Faces like his tend to blur at the edges, details slipping away the moment attention shifts elsewhere. Hair of an indeterminate shade, eyes that did not hold the gaze, a voice that never quite rose above the level of background noise. The sort of man who vanished easily, the sort of man the world could forget without effort. And yet not in my world. His name had weight now. It had anchored itself somewhere in the architecture of my thoughts, resistant to erosion, immune to the quiet processes that strip away the unnecessary. I could feel it there, fixed and immovable, as though it had been driven into place, rather than simply remembered. That alone would have been enough to concern me, because in my experience, the universe does not cling to the unremarkable without reason. I followed the trail the way I always do, not through footprints pressed into soft ground or the unreliable testimony of witnesses who mistake assumption for memory, but through the lingering residue of the impossible. Where something has transgressed the natural order, truly transgressed it, not merely bent it in ways that can be rationalized, there is always a mark left behind. Not visible in the conventional sense. Not something that can be photographed, catalogued, or explained away in reports. A bruise. That is the closest approximation I have found. A discoloration in the fabric of reality itself, subtle but unmistakable to those who know how to look. It is not a wound, precisely. There is no clean break, no obvious rupture, but rather a place where the world has been handled too roughly, where pressure has been applied from the wrong direction, leaving behind a distortion that lingers long after the initial act is past. Most people never notice them. They walk past these places every day, their senses dutifully smoothing over the irregularities, their minds rejecting the discomfort before it can take shape. The human perception is a remarkable thing, not for what it reveals, but for what it so efficiently conceals. I do not have that luxury. I see them everywhere, in the slight hesitation of a shadow that should fall cleanly, but instead falters, as though uncertain of its allegiance to light, in reflections that arrive a fraction too late, or not at all, in the way certain sounds seem to originate from a point just behind where they ought to be. These are the minor ones, the incidental abrasions left by forces that brush too closely against the surface of things. What I was looking for was not minor. The first true bruise lay 3 streets over from the alley, subtle enough to evade casual notice, but pronounced to my senses as a lesion beneath pale skin. It occupied the front window of a bookshop that had long since closed its doors to ordinary commerce. The sign above it had faded into illegibility, the letters worn down by time and neglect until they resembled symbols from a language no longer in use. At a glance, the glass was unremarkable, intact, unbroken, faintly clouded with grime. It reflected the street as it should, the narrow pavement, the skeletal remains of passing light, the slow seep of rain that continued to fall without conviction. But reflection, like truth, is a matter of perspective. I shifted my angle, just slightly. The street vanished. In its place, the glass revealed a space that could not, by any reasonable measure, fit within the dimensions of the building it belonged to. A vast interior stretched away into impossible distance. A library, if one insisted on using familiar terms, though the word felt insufficient. Shelves rose in spiraling tiers, curving inward as they ascended, bending toward a central void that swallowed light rather than reflected it. The architecture defied stability, each level leaning into the next with an unsettling organic grace, as though the entire structure were in the process of folding into itself. It reminded me, uncomfortably, of a throat, a vast, patient maw, lined not with flesh but with knowledge, endless volumes arranged in patterns that suggested purpose, without ever resolving into clarity. The deeper one looked, the more the space seemed to contract, drawing the gaze inward, inviting it to follow paths that could not be retraced. I did not linger there. Observation, in such cases, is a form of participation. I stepped forward. The boundary offered no resistance. The glass did not shatter, nor ripple, nor acknowledge my passage in any way that could be described as physical. Instead, there was a brief sensation of displacement, as though I had momentarily ceased to occupy a single, coherent position. Then I was inside. The bell above the door did not ring. It sighed. The sound was soft, almost regretful, as though the act of my entry had confirmed something long suspected. It lingered in the air a moment too long, echoing not outward, but inward, folding back upon itself in a manner that suggested the space was less concerned with announcing arrivals than with remembering them. The air within was dense, heavy with particulates that drifted in slow, aimless patterns. Dust, certainly, but not the inert kind that gathers in neglected places. This dust felt detentive. It clung to the back of the throat, settled into the lungs with a quiet insistence, carrying with it a scent that resisted classification. Old. Yes, but not merely aged. There was something beneath it, something that did not belong to any era that could be measured in years. A primordial note, faint but persistent, like the lingering echo of a language, spoken before sound was properly understood. Books lined the walls, or what passed for walls in a space that seemed reluctant to define its own boundaries. They were arranged in rows that suggested order, though the longer one looked, the less certain that order became. Spines of leather, cloth, materials I could not name, each bearing titles that refused to remain fixed. I stepped closer to one shelf, narrowing my focus. For a moment, the letters held. Then they shifted.
Not randomly.
Not chaotically. They rearranged, each character sliding into new configurations with a deliberate, almost thoughtful precision. Words formed and dissolved in rapid succession, languages overlapping, symbols emerging that possessed meaning I could not access without consequence. I felt a sharp pressure behind my eyes, a warning, not from the books, but from something within me that understood the cost of looking too closely. I looked away. When I turned back, she was there, behind the counter. I had not seen her enter. There had been no sound, no movement to mark her arrival. She simply was present, occupying the space in a manner that suggested she had always done so, and that my failure to notice her sooner was a deficiency on my part, rather than an absence on hers. She had the outline of a woman. That is the most precise way I can describe it. Her form adhered, broadly, to the expectations of human anatomy. 2 arms, a torso, a head held at the appropriate height, but the details resisted confirmation. The edges of her figure seemed uncertain, as though they had not fully committed to their current arrangement. At times, it appeared as though she were slightly misaligned with herself, a fraction out of phase, her presence echoing in positions just adjacent to where she stood.
You should not be here.
Her voice did not emerge as a single, unified sound. It arrived in layers, each one slightly delayed, creating a subtle dissonance, as though multiple versions of the same statement had been spoken in quick succession and imperfectly synchronized.
I'm looking for whoever killed Elias Rook.
The name settled into the space with an odd weight. For a moment, the dust seemed to still, the shifting titles on the shelves pausing in their restless rearrangement. She regarded me. There was a pause, not empty, but full of consideration, as though the word I had chosen required evaluation. Then she smiled. It was not a natural progression of expression. The smile did not appear. It unfolded, slowly and deliberately, like a mechanism revealing itself piece by piece. It took too long, and when it was complete, it did not align properly with the rest of her face.
Are you certain he was killed?
The words sounded foreign in her mouth, as though she were testing its structure, finding it insufficient.
Edited then, if you prefer.
The correction settled into place, and something changed. Her attention sharpened, not in a way that could be mapped to facial movement, but in the density of her presence. The space around her seemed to deepen, as though she had drawn more of it into herself. Her eyes, if they could be called that, shifted. They did not widen or narrow. They deepened, revealing layers that had not been visible before. Looking into them felt less like meeting a gaze and more like peering down into a well whose depth could not be measured. The longer one looked, the more one became aware of the fact that something might be looking back from far below. She spoke softly. This time, the echoes aligned.
Then you're already too late.
I usually am too late, and that's why I get results.
The corner of her mouth twitched, an approximation of amusement, perhaps. She leaned forward. The motion was slight, but the effect was not. The air between us resisted the change, warping subtly, as though reality itself were uncertain how to accommodate her movement. Lines bent where they should have remained straight. The distance between us felt both shorter and longer than it had been a moment before.
You do not understand what you're hunting, little witch.
There was no accusation in the statement. No warning even. Only fact. I almost laughed. The sound hovered at the edge of my throat before I allowed it to pass.
No one ever does. But that's never stopped me.
Your kind plays with threads, connections, permissions, small negotiations with forces that tolerate your presence so long as you remain, how shall we say, insignificant.
There was something like disdain there, or perhaps it was simply perspective.
But this is not thread work. This is authorship.
The term struck with unexpected force. It was not unfamiliar. I had encountered it before, in fragments, in warnings half remembered, in texts that had been carefully restricted, even among those who dealt in the same currencies I did. Rituals that did not merely bend reality, but defined it. Practices that did not request permission, but assumed it. Things best left unexamined. A memory stirred, distant, incomplete, of a lesson interrupted before it could be fully imparted.
Who is the author?
The question felt insufficient the moment it left my lips. Her smile returned, broader this time, stretching just beyond the limits of what her face could comfortably contain.
Something that has begun to notice. It is being read.
The implications settled slowly. I did not ask another question. There are moments when too much inquiry becomes invitation. I turned, retracing my steps toward the door, or what had been a door. The space resisted my departure less than I had expected, though I could feel it observing me, cataloging my movement in ways I did not care to contemplate. The bell sighed again as I crossed the threshold. The street reassembled itself around me, the illusion of normalcy snapping back into place with practiced ease. The rain continued its slow descent, the world resuming its performance as though nothing had occurred. I stood there for a moment, letting my senses recalibrate. Then I noticed the weight in my hand.
A book.
I did not remember taking it. It rested against my palm with an unsettling warmth, its cover soft to the touch, almost yielding. There was no title visible, no marking to indicate its origin or purpose. For a moment, I considered discarding it. Then something dark welled up along its edge. A thin line at first, then another. The substance, if it could be called that, seeped through the cover with a slow, deliberate persistence, thick and dark, clinging to the surface before beginning its gradual descent. It bled, not quickly, not violently, but with a quiet, inexorable certainty that suggested it had every intention of continuing for as long as it was allowed. Back in my apartment, I locked the doors, sealed the windows, and drew a circle that was less protection than declaration. I am here. I see. I resist. The book lay on my table, pulsing faintly. I did not open it. Instead, I listened. There is a trick, you see, to hearing what should not be heard. You do not strain. You do not seek. You simply allow the silence to deepen until it becomes something else. And in that depth, I heard it. Not a voice. A revision. Something vast was rewriting the city, not in fire or flood, but in subtle emissions. People erased. Events altered. Causes detached from effects. A narrative being tightened, refined, perfected. Elias Rook had not been murdered. He had been removed from the story. And I had noticed. That made me a problem. The shadows in my apartment began to lengthen, not with the light, but against it. I drew a blade, not steel, but something carved from the concept of endings, and pressed it to my palm. Blood welled up, black as ink.
Fine. You want a story?
I began to write, not with pen, but with will, etching my existence into the fabric of things, anchoring myself against whatever sought to erase me. Every memory, every scar, every sin, I forced them into permanence. The room shuddered, Something pressed against the edges of reality, vast and curious. I felt it reading me, judging, editing.
No, you don't get to decide what stays.
For a moment, just a moment, I felt resistance. Not from the book, from somewhere else, from something older, something that had seen countless stories rise and fall and cared for none of them. And in that indifference, I found leverage. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The city looked normal. It always does. But I knew better now. Somewhere, something was still writing, still shaping, still pruning away the inconvenient pieces of existence. I lit another cigarette, inhaling the familiar taste of earth and ash. Elias Rook was gone, but I wasn't.
Not yet.
And as long as I remained, I would read between the lines. I would hunt the author. And, if necessary, I would learn to write back. If you enjoyed this tale, please leave a like, a comment, and subscribe. It would mean the world to us.